Are you looking for world-class health and wellness advice combined with a dose of inspiration and spiritual encouragement? You've come to the right place. This is nourishment for body and soul. This is Manna, and I'm Dr. Turner. Welcome. Welcome to episode 2. So you want to hear a little more, eh? You must be a glutton for punishment. Okay, well, have it your way. So here's the question I know you are asking yourself. Can I relate to this guy? Can I connect to him in any way? I mean, I know he's a successful doctor and all that. And did somebody mention handsome, dashing, sophisticated, suave, charming? But I digress. Anyway, he's all of that stuff, but does he understand me? I get it. So let's talk. I'm going to share with you candidly about some of my greatest struggles. They begin at age 3. So here we go. Drum roll, please. You can relate to me if you are from a divorced family or have daddy issues. My parents separated and went through a divorce when I was 3. And I remember it being a painful and difficult time, as you could imagine. I remember some arguing and then living alone with my mom for several years. I remember my godmother taking care of me and my stepfather coming into my life, who turned out to be a fantastic man. Along the way, however, there's always this yearning of wanting to see your parents back together. Some faint hope deep inside, like a little candle that flickers and just won't go out, that somehow they'll stop arguing and they'll learn to love each other again and they'll come back together again and you'll live together as a happy unit. And I think you never quite get rid of that. I think it lingers on until some point you just grow up and you're told and, you, I guess, realize that it's not possible, and you kind of grow out of your childhood naive memories and hopes. But I remember carrying that little hope in my mind, in my soul for a long time. And I remember as I was growing up, my relationship wasn't great with my dad. If I could be perfectly frank, he was a very difficult person to get along with. He tended to be very critical, judgmental, harsh, dismissive, rude, demeaning. You could say that he was verbally abusive in some ways. And so, according to the custody arrangement, I would go spend time with him, but it was always really difficult for me emotionally. And many times I would come back home in tears. I remember pulling up to the house and I'd be drying my tears because I didn't want my mom to see how upset I was when I would walk in the door. Typically, my dad would have been arguing with me or berating me about something or other. And it was just so crushing that I'd just be sulking in silence, staring out the window and trying to dab my tears. As soon as we pulled into the driveway, I'd quickly open the door, slam it, typically not say much of anything, and slink my way towards the front door. At one point, it got so bad that my mom noticed I was typically depressed and in a funk for like a week after visiting my dad. She said, "You need to go get counseling. I'm going to sign you up to find a counselor." Now, understand, I was a 13-year-old boy in 7th grade. So I'm like, counseling? No way. That's for crazy people. That's for kids with mental problems. I don't have mental problems, Mom. I'm fine. I don't need a counselor. Thankfully, she ignored that and pushed forward and got me a wonderful counselor who's an African-American man, which is highly important to the story because my dad's African-American and my mom was white. And so I saw African-American men in such a negative light on that interpersonal basis. It was great to see now someone in a positive light who was a professional. He was kind, he was articulate, he listened, he was empathetic, and he was a whole lot of things that my dad wasn't. And it just opened up a ray of light and of healing in my soul. And I remember being really blessed by that experience. But I continued to struggle in my relationship with my dad, and ultimately that didn't get solved until I found God and I understood God's forgiveness. And then I had a heart-to-heart discussion with my dad, and we'll probably talk about that at some later podcast episode, but it turned out to be a beautiful reconciliation. And in our adult lives, we've gone on to have a closer relationship than we ever did as children. And this culminated in a very poignant but beautiful way over the last couple of years as he developed Alzheimer's, and I had to move him into a care home in Phoenix, and he ultimately passed away just a couple months ago. And I was at his bedside in the last few days of his life, and just thanking God that we didn't have to die in estrangement. He didn't have to die in bitterness, but there was love, and I could hold his hand and I could talk to him, and I could even sing to him in some of his last moments on earth, and that I was going to see him again in heaven. So God did an absolutely beautiful work in that, and I'll be forever grateful. Well, you also can relate to me if you have ever felt out of place. As I mentioned, my mom was white, and when she remarried a fantastic gentleman who was also white. So we grew up as this white family in mainly white neighborhoods in Northern California. I had a younger brother and a younger sister, so I looked like the odd person out in this family. Sometimes people wondered if I was adopted, and I'd typically go to school and I'd be the only brown or black person there. And this did cause some trouble along the way, as you might imagine. There was bullying, getting picked on, being called names, just feeling out of place. I had curly hair, and I remember being ashamed of my big curly hair at one point. I liked to keep my hair kind of short. I remember being extremely ashamed of my middle name. So my middle name is Kwame, Kwame, and that's an African name that my father gave me. He had spent some time in Ghana, and the leader at the time was named Kwame Nkrumah. This was in the late 60s or early 70s, I believe. My father wanted to give me that name. And all growing up, you could not get me to tell you what my middle name was. Nobody at school knew my middle name. Nobody on baseball, nobody on soccer team. I would not divulge that. It was just too other. It was too different. It was too strange. And it clearly marked me as some kind of foreign, strange black person. And I just wanted to fit in with all the other white kids at school in suburban USA, San Francisco Bay Area. So that was a point of difficulty for me. And I always felt a bit out of place in that regard. So perhaps you can relate. Next up, you could relate to me if you were ever the fat kid. So although I am the paragon of health and wellness at the moment, I was not always that way. In fact, genetically, I have a predisposition to be a little chunky. And when I was young, I used to wear husky-sized clothing, which basically meant, your kid was a little chubby, and that's the polite way of saying it. So although I was athletic, I was always in the husky-sized clothing. And I remember right around puberty, right? I remember looking at the other guys, I'd go play basketball or play soccer with them. And I'm like, this is not fair. Like, they have little pec muscles and stuff, and I'm just all kind of soft and doughy, in my pecs. And some of these guys have abs. You can actually see ab muscles. I'm like, I can't see any ab muscles, I'm just kind of doughy and soft. I have little rolls, and then the ultimate embarrassment, this is my own birthday party. This was in 7th grade. It's my own birthday party. We're going to go to the ocean. This is Northern California. You need a wetsuit. Okay. So we rent wetsuits. We're all standing around. Imagine 7 or 8, 13-year-old boys getting in their wetsuits, ready to start this party. And I'm struggling to pull my wetsuit on. Okay. I'm feeling like a fat little sausage trying to pull this wetsuit up, and I kind of got it up around my legs and my backside. I've always genetically had a big backside too. So this wetsuit was just tight, and I'm trying to zip it up, and it's just pinching my little chub rolls and my little doughy chest, and I'm trying to suck in my gut, and I'm feeling like minimal amounts of air. I swear, I think it was my mom. Some adult had to come help me zip it up super tight up the front, right? And I'm like sucking everything, and everything's getting pulled in. It was like Spanx, and then they zip this little fat sausage boy up, and I'm like waddling over. Meanwhile, the kids are bored to tears, like waiting for me to get on the boogie boards and get this party started, right? And I was mortified. It was so unfair. And all the little boys with abs and pec muscles were just, running around their wetsuits, ready to get the party going. So it took me a while to get over that. I might still need some healing. I'm not sure. Anyway, gosh, I'm having emotions talking about that. So yes, I was a fat kid at times. That didn't change until high school, and that's when I took my high school health class. And sophomore year of high school, started getting healthy, just got like a light switch flicked on underneath me about eating right, and actually got too into it. And actually, looking back, I would say I developed an eating disorder. I actually would say that I had a male eating disorder because I wouldn't eat anything if it had fat in it. So this was during the low fat, massive diet emphasis of like the late 80s, early 90s. And so I was scrupulously reading labels. If it had any fat in it, I was not eating it. So I was eating like oatmeal, tuna, beans, that's it. No fat, maybe some sugar here and there. That's it. And I started to lose a lot of weight. I started to run. But I started to become really just obsessed with being lean, and looking on it now, especially nowadays with social media and Instagram and phones and all that, I would say that I was a self-obsessed teenager with a body image disorder. And thankfully it wasn't amplified as much as it can be nowadays. So I have a lot of sympathy for young people, including young men in that situation. It got so bad one time, I remember I was going to the bank with my mom. The teller asked my mom, like, "What's wrong with your son? Is he okay?" And I had lost so much weight. And I remember also my hand stopped working. So my left hand, it didn't open and close well. And my mom really just kind of laid into me at this point. She's like, "Michael, I don't know what's going on. You've taken this too far. You're not eating any of my cookies. You're not eating, any of the stuff that I make. You're reading every dang label. This is just too far. What is wrong with you?" And when my hand stopped working, when the lady at the bank thought I looked ill, that was my wake-up call. So I turned some things around at that point. Now, hopefully, I do believe I found that nice middle ground to be healthy for the right reasons, but also all things in moderation. And I talk a lot about that with my patients, right? They'll say, "Well, how do I eat in a healthy way? How do I lose weight? I know I should not be eating any sugar, and I know I got to cut out all the desserts." And I'm like, well, first thing is, let's make this sustainable. This needs to feel sustainable, right? If you're just functioning on willpower and deprivation, and I can't, and I shouldn't, and I won't, and I feel guilty if I do, blah, 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 that's not going to last. That's not sustainable. Number one. Number two, it's not fun. God gave us taste buds. He created flavors for a reason. They're delightful. We have cultures all over the world that come up with amazing ways to eat food. I'm a big time foodie. I love flavors, right? I can't imagine life without tiramisu or creme brulee or tapioca pudding. I could go on. Good chocolate mousse, watermelon. There's just so many flavors. And so I tell people it's really about moderation. It's okay. You just don't have dessert every night. You don't have to go back for seconds. You can have a reasonable amount. You can share it with your spouse, etc. So I think I found a nice moderation in my life. But if you're ever the fat kid, I can understand you. How about this one? You can relate to me if you were ever a stranger in a foreign culture. So when I was 16, I got really interested in being an exchange student. I was growing up in my high school in Northern California, never much had particular exposure to foreign countries, never much interest other than band. It was my sophomore year of band. I played trumpet. This beautiful young woman with a tan and an amazing accent sat down next to me out of nowhere. She was a senior. Her name was Christina, and she was fresh back from New Zealand. I didn't even know where that was, but I knew it was cool. And she was cool. And so I'm like, I need to keep talking to her about any random topic I can come up with, because I just like staring at her, and she smells good, and she's got a great tan, and this accent is amazing, and I'm smitten, etc. But anyway, where did she go? And, how can I do something like that? So I got really interested in being an exchange student. My high school had a little exchange student club called AFS. And so I was an official AFS exchange student to the Dominican Republic, which I'm sure will come up in other episodes and other stories. There's a lot tied into that year. It turns out to be the most significant year of my life, bar none, the most life-changing, the most direction-setting. It was an extraordinary year. But during that year, as you can imagine, I was extremely homesick. So I lived with a host family, went to school in Spanish. Nobody in my family spoke much English. I was away from all my friends, my peer group. Needless to say, this was in the early 90s. So this was pre-cell phone. This was pre-internet. This was pre-social media. If I wanted to call my family, I would get on a landline if it was available, call them. If I wanted to call some random teenage friend at home, I had to call the family phone number line and hope that Johnny was home at the time and not at baseball practice. Who knows where Johnny could have been. Plus we had a time zone difference. And so I had to just make make my new life in the Dominican Republic, which is exactly the point, right? But in doing that, there are some real challenges that you face. You feel like an outcast. You feel stupid. First of all, I knew I was intelligent, but not having mastery of the language, you're limited in how you can express yourself. So I had that very uncomfortable feeling of people looking at me like, judging me a little bit and just feeling muted, not able to express myself, right? Not able to engage in an intelligent way, in an articulate way with any kind of depth like I'd want to. And being very challenged in that way. And I remember falling asleep, crying many times out of homesickness, just wanting to be back with my friends, my peer group, my high school where things were comfortable and easy. And here I was in the Dominican Republic and mosquitoes were biting me and I didn't understand the language and I was living in a big city and a bunch of experiences were just new and different and challenging at the same time. And because of that, I have a deep sense of understanding and respect and appreciation, I guess, and sympathy for people who are here from other places, and that I would always be welcoming in my approach, and that hopefully we as a community would be welcoming, right? That's the beauty of our country. We are the world's country. If you think about it, we have people from every single nation here, and we've been welcoming people from all over the world since we got started. Not always under the best circumstances, granted. I mean, slavery, namely, and other types of scenarios where people came sometimes out of hardship. But in the end, this is everybody's country. It's the world's country when we're at our best. And I have I find it beautiful. And I also can be sympathetic for that person who's a refugee from, Iraq recently and who has PTSD from seeing family members lost in a car bomb. I've had patients like that, right? That refugee from Ukraine, that refugee from Central America who had to cross a river just to try to find a job so they could support themselves. And, that person who came here was a professional actually in Colombia, a bank level manager with a college education. He came here legally, took him a while. He had political asylum. And when they started him here, they put him out in the fields to pick apples. Okay. He had never picked apples in his life. He didn't know what he was doing. He was overheated, hot. He was just toughing it out because that was the only job available for him at the time. And he did that for years, using porta potties, all of that. I understand, in many ways what that's like. And so if you've ever felt that, you can understand me and I can understand you. Furthermore, I would say you can relate to me if you have ever felt in over your head. Okay. Just in over your head, overcommitted, overwhelmed, facing a gigantic challenge that you feel like perhaps you're not up for. I felt this way when I got to Stanford, and I felt this way particularly as I began my second year. My second year was the year I decided to become a pre-med. So voila, I had to do 4 years of pre-med now in 3. Okay, made worse by the fact that I didn't do any of that preparation in high school, not knowing that I wanted to have a medical career. So I was not one of those people who took advanced chemistry, advanced math, advanced sciences of any kind in high school. I got good grades, but no particular emphasis on science or medicine. So here I was at Stanford, hugely competitive, as you can imagine, pre-med, trying to do this all 4 years in 3 years. I remember the stress level was extraordinary. Staying up late, going to office hours, studying, on the weekends, just the grind and the sense of like a cloud over me at all times of work and things needing to get done and problem sets and papers and all of that. And I remember it came down to my last quarter, graduation. I kept having this bad dream that somehow I didn't check some box somewhere, some little requirement like some PE class or some anthropology credit or something like slipped through the cracks somehow. And I was just perseverating on this, and it was this bad dream. And I remember I was really unsettled by this, partly because I'm also a poor planner, and it's, fairly likely that something like that would have happened. So I'm just saying, oh God, please, I got to graduate. Like, my parents are going to kill me if I'm like 2 credits short because of some ridiculous anthropology thing that I just overlooked when I was a freshman. I should have done it and I didn't pay attention, and now I can't graduate, and we got to spend more thousands of dollars more money, right? So anyway, again, back in that day, this was all pre-internet, pre-computer technology for the most part. So the way you knew, literally the way you knew if you actually graduated, you went down to the student union on a bulletin board. Your name was printed up on a piece of paper Okay, tacked to this bulletin board. You had to go find it. If your name was on the paper, you were going to walk next week. If it wasn't, you weren't. Period. End of discussion. Right? So I'm heading down the student union. I'm like, please, God, please, God, please, God, please. I probably could do this a little bit longer, but I really don't want to. I got no more time and energy and money for this right now. Please, God. And I'm looking at the board. I'm like scrolling down, my fingers on that thing, right? I'm like, Michael Turner. Yes. Yes. Did it. Yes. And I remember getting wildly enthusiastic, probably looked like a crazy person. But we got it done. That name was on there. Got the graduation done. So there we have it. Those are a couple stories, friends. Some of my greatest challenges growing up. I will look forward to visiting with you a little more in our next episode, where I discuss how I was fired from the first 5 jobs that I ever had, my adventures on a shoestring budget without health insurance, my first day at Harvard, and the time I got mad at my wife for shrinking my jeans. Spoiler alert, I had gotten fat and out of shape. Until then, I am yours truly, Dr. Turner. This wraps up another edition of Manna. I enjoyed our time together, and I hope that this has inspired you towards a healthy and happy life. Be blessed.